You never really know what betrayal feels like until you're standing in the dark, watching the person you love most destroy everything while your baby sleeps in the backseat. I used to believe that love could fix anything, that if two people were willing to fight for it, no betrayal was too deep, no scar too ugly to heal. I was wrong. Because sometimes the person you're fighting for is the one quietly reloading the gun behind your back. My name is Clara, and for 10 years, I lived a life that looked perfect from the outside. A cozy house in the suburbs, three beautiful children, a husband everyone said was one of the good ones. His name is Ethan. Charming, reliable, the kind of man who remembers birthdays, kisses his kids goodnight, and brings flowers when he's late. That's the version everyone saw. But I knew a different Ethan, the one who shattered me once and now again. It started 2.5 years ago when I found a message. Just one. A simple, can't wait to see you again, kiss emoji. It was from her. Her name was Vanessa, a woman I'd seen around his office. Blonde, polished, confident. The kind of woman who walks into a room and instantly owns it. At first, I told myself it was harmless, a misunderstanding. But when I confronted Ethan, the look on his face told me everything. He didn't deny it, he just broke. And that was somehow worse. He begged, he cried, he said he was lost, he said it meant nothing. So we separated. For nearly a year, I tried to rebuild myself piece by piece. Therapy, journals, late night crying in the shower where the kids wouldn't hear me. I told myself I'd never go back. But love is a cruel thing. It whispers lies dressed as hope. When we reconciled, it felt like a fairy tale restart. He was attentive, apologetic, almost saint-like in his devotion. He read all the books the counselor suggested, he went to therapy, he even deleted social media to focus on us. I remember one night, lying in bed, his hand on my belly as he whispered, "We're stronger now, Clara. We survived the storm." A month later, I found out I was pregnant. Our miracle baby. Everyone called it a blessing. I thought it was proof that love had triumphed. But peace doesn't last long when built on broken glass. It started small, subtle shifts that only a woman in love could notice. He was too perfect again. Breakfast in bed, random flowers, offers to take the kids to the park so I could rest. At first, I was touched. Then I noticed the timing. Always weekends, always afternoons when his phone was suddenly on silent. Once, he offered to do the grocery run, something he never did, and came back almost 2 hours later with nothing but milk and cereal. When I asked where he'd been, he smiled and said, "Traffic." But the part that broke my peace wasn't suspicion. It was my instinct, the one I'd buried deep. That little voice whispering, "He's doing it again." I fought it for weeks. I didn't want to be that paranoid wife again. But one Saturday morning, when he said he'd take the baby so I could have a me day, something inside me snapped. I followed him. My heart pounded so hard it felt like a warning drum in my chest. I told myself I was crazy, that I'd find him at the grocery store or a park, maybe even grabbing a surprise gift. But fate, it's cruelly poetic. He drove to a quiet parking lot behind an industrial complex, half abandoned, half forgotten. I parked 2 rows behind, hidden behind a delivery truck. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely hold my phone. Then I saw her, Vanessa, Same golden hair, same careless smile, walking up to his car like she'd done it 100 times. My vision blurred, my throat closed. I told myself maybe they were just talking, maybe closure, maybe work. But then she opened the passenger door and climbed in. A minute later, movement. Rhythmic, obvious. And the worst part? The faint reflection of the baby's car seat in the back window. My baby, my 9-month-old son, sleeping while his father was having sex in the front seat. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't scream. I wanted to break every window, drag him out, make the world watch his shame. But I didn't move. I just stood there, heart racing, skin cold, eyes burning, and watched the man I had built my life around destroy it all over again. I stayed until she left, until he adjusted his shirt, glanced in the mirror, and smiled at himself. That same arrogant smirk that once made me fall in love with him. Then I drove home. I don't even remember the drive, just the trembling, the nausea, the silence. When he returned later, holding our baby and smiling like nothing happened, something in me changed forever. It wasn't rage yet. It was emptiness. The kind that feels like a funeral inside your chest. He kissed my cheek. I didn't move. He asked if I was okay. I smiled and said, "Perfect." That night, I booked an emergency therapy session. I needed someone to stop me from doing something irreversible. But when I sat in that sterile office, the therapist's voice blurred into background noise. She told me to breathe, to process, to not act impulsively. And I realized something. I didn't want calm. I didn't want forgiveness. I wanted destruction. The next morning, I looked at him differently, not as a husband, but as an opponent. He thought he'd done it again, that I'd cry, fall apart, forgive. But this time, I wasn't the same woman he broke before. This time, I would make him regret ever thinking I was weak. That night, when he fell asleep, I stood beside his bed for a long time. He looked peaceful, almost innocent. I leaned close, whispered softly in the dark, though he couldn't hear me. "You have no idea what's coming." The plan started quietly. No screaming, no confrontation, just strategy. Step 1, collect evidence. Step 2, gather allies. Step 3, destroy him, not through rage, but through precision. Over the next week, I became an actress in my own life. Smiles at breakfast, kisses before work. He had no idea that behind every "I love you," there was a hidden camera in the hallway clock, a GPS tracker in his car, and a private investigator ready to follow him anywhere. He still saw me as that broken, trusting wife, the one who forgave. He didn't realize forgiveness was just the calm before the storm. The first footage arrived 3 days later. Him and Vanessa again. Same parking lot, same car, same sleeping baby in the backseat. That's when I stopped feeling love or pain. I felt purpose. And purpose is a dangerous thing in the hands of a betrayed woman. When you decide to break a man, you learn quickly. Rage is useful for ignition, but it's cold, patient strategy that finishes the job. I had already felt the hot, terrible flare of betrayal, the moment my world split open in that empty parking lot. Now I needed something else, a map. Revenge that is cinematic needs beats, scene, timing, an audience, closure that reads like a verdict. So I started to build one. First, the smallest mercy. I let him keep believing he'd won. At breakfast, he was polite and smug. He kissed the kids, told them goofy jokes, balanced cereal bowls on milk-stained knees like an expert circus performer. He smiled at me across the table as if nothing had changed. He thought my silence was the final surrender of a hurt woman. He thought I was only broken. On the interior, I was anything but. The lines in my face hardened into a mask. I measured my days with a checklist: legal advisor, private investigator, video evidence, financial records, and a plan to weaponize his arrogance. Step 1. Evidence. There are moments when the world rewards patience. A couple $100 dropped into a private investigator's account, and I had a man in a navy suit who understood the anatomy of an affair. He had tools I didn't: long-range lenses, license plate readers, a calm look for when he returned footage that would make me want to burn the house down. When the first reel arrived, I didn't watch it in a fury. I sat at the kitchen table, the baby asleep inside the monitors, and pressed play with a quiet that surprised me. The footage was grainy at first. Ethan getting out of his car, Vanessa's laughter, hands that found each other too easily. Then the parking lot. Then the car window reflection. A small, impossible sight. The baby's car seat like a ghost in the back. There are images that steal your breath away. This was one. I printed everything. I made duplicates. I uploaded them to a locked cloud with a time-stamped backup. Evidence is a language courts understand. It speaks louder than promises and love and excuses. Step 2. Allies. You can't do this alone. Not if you want the hit to land where it counts. I called Mara, an old friend from college who'd become a lawyer. She wasn't shocked. She was clinical, precise. She said, "We file for custody on the basis of reckless endangerment and willful disregard. You have video. You have motive. Don't act on impulse. Let the law puncture him." Mara taught me how to be ruthless within the rules. She showed me the safety of procedures, what to say to the police, the questions to avoid in public, how to keep our children's names out of online posts that could be used against me. She read the footage, then looked at me like someone seeing a crime scene. She said, "This is bad, but it's also your weapon." I found a support group of women who'd been through similar betrayals, not to fuel vengeance, but to understand the terrain. Their stories were brutal, and their advice practical. Document everything, one told me. Hire a good family lawyer. Don't let him gaslight you into silence. Step 3. The legal front. My lawyer filed emergency papers, temporary custody, and an injunction against unsupervised visits. The documents were precise, clinical, the kind of language that strips romance and leaves only the facts. I submitted the private investigator footage with an affidavit. I described the dates, locations, and the sleeping baby in the backseat. Ethan's face on the day he received the notice was worth a dozen silent victories. He tried to smile, tried to render it a misunderstanding. "Can we talk about this?" he said. His voice lacked conviction. I said, "You already did the talking, and I let the law speak." Step 4. Social strategy. I could have screamed the story into the wind, a public social media blasting that would satisfy some immediate itch, but public fury is often messy and short-lived. I wanted something that would resonate where it hurt most: his social world, his boss, the men who drank with him on weekends, the PTA mothers who lauded him for picking up projects. Then I began seeding calm, factual messages to HR, to his boss, to the school counselor. I attached the evidence politely. No hysteria, no finger-pointing on social media. The message was simple. There is documented evidence of repeated infidelity that endangered a minor. We recommend review. There are few things more humiliating to a modern man than the slow, bureaucratic unraveling of his professional life. HR called. An internal probe opened. The company that once hung his family portrait on their holiday wall now had an ethics team reviewing footage. Step 5. Psychological play. He was used to getting his way through charm, so I gave him none. I became colder, not vicious, not theatrical, but still and measured. I answered with facts. I stopped sharing sleep schedules. I stopped polishing his shirts. He called at odd hours, and I would text him back with one word: lawyer. It ate away at him, because finally, nothing I said could move me. One evening, he cornered me in the laundry room. "Please," he whispered, "we can fix this. For the kids. Don't do anything stupid. I looked at him like at a man from a foreign country. You did something stupid months ago, I said. This isn't about you or me anymore. This is about protecting our children. He pressed his forehead to mine in a practiced plea. I could feel the guilt in him, not the humility of a man who had tortured someone, but the fear of a man who could lose everything. His fear was a thin, delicious thing. I want the listener to understand here. Revenge isn't about noise, it's about pressure, the unrelenting kind that slowly squeezes air out of a person until they are willing to trade anything for relief. So I tightens the screws in quiet ways. I went to the pediatrician and described in clinical terms the video evidence and my fears. I asked for notes, recommendations, observations about the children's behavior. I logged every missed school event, every unexplained late return. Documentation is an antiseptic. It neutralizes the argument that this was just one mistake. Then came the most difficult part. The part I'd imagined 1,000 times when anger was all I had. Confronting Vanessa. But I didn't go to her in a grocery store with a scream. I didn't post her name on a website. Instead, I navigated the problem where it would hurt her. Her job. I learned that Vanessa worked for a boutique PR firm downtown. She was a woman who sold authenticity for a living. The worst kind of hypocrite for someone who trafficked in secrets. A carefully worded email to her HR with timestamps and a select frame from the footage made its way to her manager. The firm, which thrived on reputation and glossy reputations, couldn't afford the scandal. A week later, Vanessa called. Her voice was small. I didn't know he was taking the baby. Her denial sounded like someone practicing lines in the mirror. I listened for a long time, letting silence drag. She offered to apologize, to stop. I recorded the call. There are ethical lines here. I didn't break them. I let her make her own choices. She chose to keep the affair. She chose to let their rendezvous happen while an infant slept behind them. That's on her. Meanwhile, Ethan's world began to wobble. The company placed him on leave pending investigation. The PTA mothers who once smiled when they saw him now walked past with measured distances. Even his own father called one afternoon, voice brittle with disappointed confusion. "What have you done?" he asked. I let the voicemail sit on my phone like a small, private victory. And then, the trap that made the whole thing cinematic, the public unraveling. I didn't stage a viral video or hire a hack. I used his own arrogance. Ethan loved performing the repentant husband for the neighborhood. He liked to fix things for show, to be seen as the man who did the heavy lifting at weekend charity drives. So I organized something he couldn't resist. A family-first block party hosted by us. The invite was casual, warm. I volunteered him to man the barbecue. I posted a note in the neighborhood group praising his work with the youth soccer team. Of course he accepted. On the day of the block party, the sky was a ridiculous blue. Kids ran with popsicles stuck to their chins. Neighbors brought casseroles they'd pretend tasted better than they did. Ethan lit the grill, gave a short, polished speech about community and second chances. People clapped. He basked. I stood at the edge of the crowd, the camera hidden by a folded umbrella. My clothes were ordinary, the wardrobe of a woman who wanted no one to suspect anything. I smiled and chatted and thanked people for coming. I moved like a hostess, but my eyes were on Ethan, the man who had sat with his mistress while his child slept within arm's reach. At the peak of his applause, I walked up and tapped the microphone he'd been using. "Before we end," I said, voice steady, "I have something to say." The hush hit like velvet. Ethan's smile faltered. I walked to the center and told the story plainly. I didn't scream. I didn't flail. I showed 3 frames from the footage on a tablet I'd synced to a small portable screen. The image of the sleeping baby in the back seat filled the little projection, tiny and undeniable. There was a sound like a pin dropping, then a collective intake of breath. Neighbors leaned forward. Women turned pale. Someone's kid started to cry. Ethan's face went entirely white. He begged me afterward, in the yard, palms up like a supplicant. He said, "Please don't do this to the kids," he said, voice cracking. I held the image of the sleeping baby in my mind and shook my head. I already did it for the kids. I did it for their safety. The block party became the pivot point. That night, snippets from the footage, carefully edited, presented only with fact and context, were in the hands of the school board, the HR department, and close friends who had supported my family. Nobody wanted a scandal in the neighborhood, but once the evidence is in the light, a different kind of social justice takes hold. People distance themselves because they're frightened by what they've seen and what it reveals. But revenge is not complete without pain. I promised myself I would not enjoy the parts of it that hurt my children, and so I built my strikes to minimize collateral damage. I fought using sterile legal channels, dignified disclosures, and quiet social pressure. Yet every victory cost me something I hadn't fully anticipated: the slow exhalation of my old life. The nights grew lonelier. I wasn't the woman burning buildings and dancing atop rubble. I was the one who structured the demolition like an architect. I watched Ethan's fall with a clinical eye, but in the solitude between hits, I felt the ache. The children needed someone to soothe their confusion when they felt their father's presence then. They needed routines and explanations that wouldn't warp their view of love into suspicion. That was the cruel thesis of my revenge. In saving them, I eroded the family they had known. I told myself it was worth it. And then, the final blow before the real war began. Ethan's lawyer called. The papers he expected to file, reconciliation, mediation, quiet settlements, were now countersued. Mara had built an airtight case not only on custody, but on reckless endangerment. The word reckless echoed in my head like a drum. It belonged to men who had been careless with lives. The judge ordered supervised visits until evidence could be fully reviewed. Ethan's leave became an extended suspension. Vanessa resigned from her job under pressure. Friends that had once split wine with us at dinner now sent thoughts and prayers from a distance. The town turned him into a cautionary tale, and he became smaller with each whisper. On TV, in neighborhood groups, and hushed lunches where women compared notes on who left whom, his name shifted from familiar to infamous. That's the thing about reputation. It's a mirror that many people look into, and when the mirror breaks, the shards cut everyone who reaches for them. Late, one night, when only the hum of the refrigerator kept house sounds alive, Ethan broke. He showed up at my door with red-rimmed eyes and a paper bag grocery held like an offering. He looked like a person who expected forgiveness to be immediate, like a meal could stitch him back into our life. The door opened a crack. I let him in. For a while, he simply sobbed into the couch cushions. He apologized in a manner so exhausted I could tell he had been rehearsing it for months. He asked for another chance. I sat across from him and listened. I had imagined this scene. In my head, it had pulsed with the satisfaction of seeing him humiliated. In reality, it was raw and human. A man reduced to please, and a woman who had to decide how much of her life should still be open to him. When he finally looked up, I said, in the calmest voice I could muster, "You made your choices. You will live with them." He left that night without asking for custody. Maybe he finally understood the gravity of his acts. Maybe he understood that once something has been witnessed, especially by a sleeping child, nothing can truly be undone. The pieces were falling. The legalities would take their course. My social circle had shifted to protect itself and my children. Ethan's career was in tatters. Vanessa's job was gone. But a deeper theater was about to begin. I had prepared the stage, gathered the witnesses, set the lights, Now, the last act, the one that would ensure this saga would echo in his bones, was still to come. Because destroying someone's world isn't the end. The real question is what you build on the ruins. They told me court would be clinical. They told me it would be about facts, dates, statutes, a place where emotion is supposedly edited away like a bad film. For me, the courtroom was a theater where everything I had hidden from the world would be played under harsh lights. I dressed that morning like armor, a navy dress that read controlled, a low heel so I could stand steady. The kids were with my sister. I wanted this to be sharp and clean. I wanted the scene to speak only in the language I had prepared: evidence, timestamps, witness testimony. Ethan arrived like a man waiting for the end credits, hollow-eyed, some of his bravado drained, leaning on the facade of a lawyer's carefully chosen words. Vanessa sat in the back of the courtroom, hair pulled back, lips pressed into a thin line. There was no melodrama from her. Her face was as if she had already been convicted by gossip and the mirror. When the judge called the case, I felt my heart beat in my ears, loud enough that for a moment it was the only sound I could hear. Mara, steady, silent, precise, stood and began the sequence we'd rehearsed a dozen times. She walked the room through my evidence like a conductor bringing in instruments one by one: surveillance footage, the private investigator's log, the pediatrician's notes, the log of missed visits and suspicious comings and goings. Then she played the footage. The image of the baby's car seat appeared on the courtroom screen. Small, obvious, impossible to deny. In that moment, something strange happened in me. All the fury flattened into an intense clarity. I wasn't seeking to humiliate for sport. I was demanding that the world recognize what had been done. A betrayal that didn't only slit hearts, but endangered a child. The law could not fix the brokenness, but it could enforce boundaries. And that boundary was what I needed for my children's safety. Ethan's defense was predictably human. Apologies couched with explanation, claims of poor judgment, pleas about stress and loneliness. Vanessa's attorney offered the tired line of consenting adults. But consent framed in the presence of a child is a language that sounds different in a court of law. The prosecutor, called in by Mara as backup to emphasize the criminal angle of reckless endangerment, asked the simple, damning question: was the baby in the car while they were intimate? Ethan's eyes, which had once found mine with coaxing tenderness, refused to meet me. "Yes," he said. He answered like a man reading a script someone else had written, because he had no stronger story left to tell. That admission changed the tenor. The judge's face tightened. A legal line had shifted from family dispute to potential criminality. We all knew what that could mean: shackles placed on choices, a narrative of neglect following a man who had once been admired. Witnesses were called. The private investigator, a man who smelled faintly of tobacco and professionalism, explained his methods. The pediatrician described the notes about sleep patterns in an anxious infant. A neighbor testified to seeing Ethan and Vanessa leave together on that day. Each voice added a tile to the mosaic I had been constructing for months. When the judge read the initial decision, supervised visitation until further evaluation, mandatory counseling for Ethan, and a referral to juvenile services for review of parental fitness, the room held a collective breath. For me, it was both triumph and incision. Triumph because I had protected the children in the way the law could. Incision because the legal repair could not stitch back what had been torn. Ethan left the courthouse a different man. Not atomized, he still had his body, his breath, the things of the world, but smaller, diminished in ways that gossip alone had not achieved. A man who had once been able to command rooms now had to answer to rules and restrictions and the quiet humiliation of being the subject of a parental fitness review. But legal victory is only the frame in which true revenge takes shape. The deeper, more private punishments were the ones that would make the story cinematic. I wanted him to live with the image, not because cruelty pleases me, but because I believed justice must be intimate. The person who hurt you should know exactly what was taken and why their life now sits on different terms. There are ways to orchestrate that without breaking the law. I used the social architecture of consequence. Ethan's employer, which had placed him on leave, called a meeting. They could not justify retaining someone under a cloud of reckless endangerment and potential criminal charge. That morning, he received a termination letter. The HR director's email was sterile, sharp, and final. It was as if his business persona had been peeled from him in one clean motion. In the world he'd built, the one with weekend charity photos and LinkedIn recommendations, there was now a gaping absence where his identity had been. Vanessa, too, disappeared. Her LinkedIn profile vanished overnight. Rumors that she had been let go for cause threaded through colleagues' whispers. Friends who had laughed with her at dinners no longer returned her calls. She reached out to me once, angry and ashamed and pleading. I recorded the call and played it for Mara. I kept it, not to humiliate her further, but because I wanted a record of all the ways people had made choices with full knowledge of their consequences. Ethan's father, a man who had once called me a good daughter-in-law at Christmas dinners, showed up at my door one rain-soaked evening. His face was a map of disappointment. He said things like, "Your kids deserve better," and "I don't know what to tell my friends." His voice trembled with the cost of his son's actions to the family name. I let him speak. Then I said what I felt was true. They deserve safety, not smoke and mirrors. I will not lie, some part of me had wanted that old comfortable life to come begging back. But if the price for returning is silence about what was done, I cannot pay it. The months that followed were a blur of bureaucracy, in exacting detail, where to sign, when to petition, how to present a timeline that reads like truth. I spent afternoons in the playground watching my kids invent worlds out of plastic slides and sand, holding them when they had nightmares about not being held. With every legal form filed, I paid a price that was not measured in money. I watched my children watch me take apart their world. I heard their questions. Why does Daddy have to go to the office for a long time? When can we see Daddy? I answered with the sort of honesty that is both simple and sharp. We need time to be safe. Daddy is getting help. Those small answers were armor that sometimes felt like a lie. I worried that their image of love would be bruised into suspicion. I worried they would blame themselves. Every night I read them stories with a voice that tried to be steady, sewed their small hands into mine, and hoped the stitches held. Yet revenge, if it is to be satisfying, must end with a moment that crystallizes change. Not just punishment, but a reversal that strikes at the root of the offender's arrogance. For Ethan, the reversal came in the most unexpected theater, his own attempt to regain control. He tried it first with speeches of remorse in private circles, with small gifts to his parents, with long letters pleading for reunification. He staged a few appearances at community events with showy contrition, hoping the public would forgive before the legal wheels finished grinding. He called me, begging for mediation, for a chance to prove he was different. I agreed to one meeting, not for him, but for the children. It was scheduled at the mediator's office, a neutral place with a round table and soothing plants. I sat across from him and watched him try to perform humility. He spoke of therapy, of learning, of wanting to be part of his children's lives. Then, quietly, I asked the question I knew would be the scalpel. If you can be that person now, why did you take the baby to be with Vanessa in a car while he slept? His face contorted in the sort of shock that's anticlimactic in a film because it's real. A man who has been forced to reconcile the image he projects with the acts he committed. He stammered. He apologized, the words hollow. I pushed further. If you can be that person for them now, why not when it mattered? He had no answer. The silence roared. That moment was the final humiliation. Not because I shamed him in public, but because I let him face the simplest truth without the shelter of charm. He had no story left that could hold up under the weight of the question. And yet, after victory, after the judge signed the orders and the world rearranged itself into safety, something in me felt ragged. I had spent months cultivating an apparatus of justice. I had stripped away his comforts, his career, his social footing. I had made sure the county files reflected what he had done. But standing at the edge of the ruins, I felt a lonely ache that surprised me. There is a cost to being the architect of someone else's fall, even when the fall is deserved. Revenge rewires you. It teaches patience and cold calculation. It sharpens a moral sense. Here is harm, here is remedy. But it also removes some soft edges from your heart. In saving my children, I had burned the bridge that once connected their small family. I had traded the possibility of a healed household for a household that could breathe again. 2 years later, the corporate headlines had faded. Ethan's name receded into the kind of rumor that people tell in accents when they want to be discreet. Vanessa had remarried, quietly, in a wedding no one I knew attended. The world moves on. Gossip is a fast-moving tide. My life, too, reassembled into something sturdy, if not exactly what it had been. I took a job with a child safety nonprofit. I wanted the work to mean something, to channel the rage and fear into a force that protects other people's small children. The organization trained parents on safe practices, supported families through custody transitions, and advocated for clearer laws around child endangerment. Sometimes at the end of long days, I would sit in my car and breathe and feel the old heat of anger. It still flared up, but more often it sat like a coiled wire, present but not in control. I dated hesitantly later. Men whispered apologies for things they had not done and offered coffee like a bandage. I accepted a date a few times, twice more. The danger now was different. Not of being lied to, but of losing the softness that had been the first casualty of my campaign. My children, the reason for my cold, furious work, thrived in small, imperfect ways. My eldest son learned to ride a bike and shouted with the unself-conscious joy that reminds me that life still holds softness. My daughter, who used to watch my face for cues of safety, began to sleep through the night without seeking me. My baby, the child who had been in the backseat, grew into a toddler who liked to stack wooden blocks and who would fall and get up again and believe the world was safe because I had made it so. There were nights when I woke up and felt hollow, as if vengeance had extracted a piece of me I couldn't get back. But there were also mornings when I watched them eat cereal and plan imaginary kingdoms, and I knew the trade, the nights for the days, had been worth it. The justice I had secured gave them the kind of slow, uneventful childhood that is a rare and precious victory. Sometimes I still lay awake and imagine a different ending, one where Ethan had never erred, where we had gone to counseling early and repaired the fracture. But those imaginings were a softened ache, not a diet of poison. I allowed myself to grieve the life that might have been, and then I got up and lived the life that was possible. In the quiet hours, a motif threaded through everything, a faded clock I kept on the mantel that had stopped on the day I first found the message. For months I'd left it frozen as a monument to the moment the world tilted. One day, I wound it and let it tick. It was a small act, but in its tiny insistence on moving forward, it felt like the truest kind of revenge. Not to keep time frozen in accusation, but to let it pass, letting my children grow in safety while I kept watch. Betrayal is a loud, animal thing. It eats you in the dark and leaves you raw. But the way you respond tells the world and yourself who you are. I chose to respond with strategy because that was the only way I could ensure my children's safety without surrendering to a private war that would have ruined all of us. Justice in my story was not merely punishment. It was boundary setting, a recalibration of safety. It was a public acknowledgement of harm and an insistence that the harmed be protected. It was messy, expensive, painful, and ultimately necessary. I don't tell the story to celebrate revenge. I tell it to illuminate what it felt like to save my children from a man who was brilliant at charm and terrible at ethics. I tell it because sometimes protecting the small and innocent requires ugly, painstaking work. I tell it because those who watch must understand the cost and the need to act smart, not only loudly. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear that legal protection is sometimes the only way to keep a child safe. Tell me in the comments, what would you do if you found someone you trusted had harmed your family? If you want more stories like this, true, cinematic, and raw, hit subscribe, press the bell, and tell me which part you want me to deep dive into next: the legal strategy, the psychology of betrayal, or how to help children heal after family crisis.